Okay, good morning. Sorry for the delay. Okay, we're on Yud Aleph and Aleph from the second Mishnah. A little less than halfway down the page. So there's an interesting scenario here where a guy says, I'm a Nazir, but I don't want the restrictions of Nazir. So he says, I'm a Nazir except for the fact that I should be able to drink wine. Or I'm a Nazir, but only on the condition that I'm able to become tamei. So Hareza Nazir va'osir b'kulan. He's a Nazir, and his condition is not valid. So we'll see the Gemara in more details. We'll taste this a little bit more details. Why exactly this is the halacha. The condition is not valid, and the law is valid. So he becomes a Nazir, and his condition is invalid. Now we have a little bit more of a nuanced case. I'm sorry, one second. I'm familiar with the concept of Nazirus, except I didn't know that part of Nazirus includes that somebody is prohibited to drink wine. Okay, so now it's sort of a mistake, somewhat of a mistake at least. And over here we have a debate. Hareza Osir. The first opinion is the opinion of the Rabbanon, the Tanakama. The first opinion is that it doesn't make a difference. Too bad you didn't know, but you're a regular Nazir and you cannot drink wine. Reb Shimon Mater. Reb Shimon over here says you're permitted. In other words, you're not a Nazir at all. Why is this? We'll see more in the Gemara, but Reb Shimon is of the opinion that because it says Nazir lahazir, it's ad sheyazir mikulan. You have to accept every prohibition of Nazir. If you exempted yourself or didn't know about one prohibition, you're not included and you're not a Nazir. Now we have a similar scenarios. The first case is the guy knew about Nazir, but he didn't know that a Nazir is prohibited in wine. The second case is I knew that a Nazir is prohibited to drink wine. But I thought I'm a drunkard and I need wine to live. Or it could be many other reasons why the guy needs wine, but he needs wine. So he thought the rabbis would give him an exemption. Or similarly, he thought that he knew that a Nazir can't become tamei, but he works for the funeral parlor. So he thought the rabbis would give him an exemption. The guy's an undertaker. So the Gemara says, Hareza mutter, then he's permitted. In other words, he's not a Nazir. And this is the opinion of the Rabbanon. Reb Shimon Oiser. Reb Shimon says you're prohibited. Again, Reb Shimon is typically the one that says Nazir achi yazir mikulan. You have to accept every single prohibition of Nazir. And yet over here, Reb Shimon saying, the guy understood that a Nazir is prohibited with wine and tumah, but he thinks he's an exception. And Reb Shimon still says he's prohibited. And the rabbis who say you don't need to accept all the prohibitions, in this case, they say you're exempt. You're not a Nazir at all. The whole thing is a mistake. Obviously, the question, yes, we're at the Gemara on Yud Aleph and Aleph, second Gemara, a little more than halfway down the page.
You're on 11a.
Yeah.
More.
So the question the Gemara will ask is, this seems to contradict itself. You have three scenarios in which it should seem, if the logic of Reb Shimon is that you need to accept every single prohibition of Nazir, in all three scenarios, Reb Shimon should say you're not a Nazir, and the rabbi should say you are a Nazir. Right? What's scenario number one is the guy says, I'm a Nazir except for wine. Where we don't find Reb Shimon disagreeing. Scenario number two makes sense. We have a Nazir who says, I didn't realize that wine was included. So Reb Shimon says, you're not a Nazir. That makes sense. Third scenario is the guy knew about the wine, but he thought he's an exception. And Reb Shimon does not say you're permitted there. Reb Shimon says you're prohibited. But the rabbis say you're permitted, which seems odd. Seems the opposite. So these are really the questions the Gemara will be asking. According to one version of the Gemara, indeed, the truth is exactly like I said it. In all three scenarios, whether the guy makes an exception for Nazir, whether the guy makes an exception for wine, whether he says, I didn't know wine is prohibited, or whether he says that new wine was prohibited, but I'm an exception. In all three scenarios, according to one version of the Gemara, Reb Shimon says you're permitted, not a Nazir. And the rabbis say you are a Nazir. But maybe not. Maybe that's not the only opinion. Okay. So the Gemara's first question is the first line of the Mishnah. The first line of the Mishnah is Reb Shimon says that there's an exception. I'm sorry. The guy who accepts a Naziris, he says, I'm a Nazir except for wine. Everybody seems to agree that you're a Nazir and you're still prohibited in wine. Ask the Gemara, let Reb Shimon disagree in the first scenario as well. So the Gemara says, you're right. Reb Shimon disagrees in the first scenario as well. Again, what does Reb Shimon hold? What's the you have to accept every single part of Nazir. That's the theoretical understanding of Reb Shimon. So according to the first opinion, you're right. If a guy says I'm a Nazir except for wine, then you didn't do all three. You're not a Nazir. You're mutter. That's the first opinion. That makes sense. So I guess it's sort of presumably the Mishnah didn't need to repeat Reb Shimon twice. That's what Reb Shimon Levi is saying. It's sort of understood that if Shimon disagrees in the middle scenario, he also probably disagrees in the first scenario. Okay. Ravina says, Reb Shimon does not disagree in the ratio, in the first scenario. My time, what's the reason? Okay, what is this?